and welcome back to my channel. As a leader, have you ever been annoyed when your staff members didn't follow through on a task or a project in the way that you expected them to? When these kinds of things happen, the tendency is to assume that we, as the leaders, explained what we wanted to happen, and for whatever reason, our team just didn't follow through. This can be somewhat challenging, for lack of a better word, and it can sometimes lead to wasted time. Well, did you ever stop and think that there could be a disconnect between what you communicated and what your staff understood? That's why in today's video, I'll give you a scenario-based example of some of the factors that could play into this. I'll also discuss 5 effective communication strategies for turning your communication weaknesses into wins. Now, if you want to hear more about this, be sure to stay tuned. I'm Jaboria, and welcome to the best place for new and emerging leaders who want help navigating challenging conversations in the workplace. When it comes to effective communication, many of us tend to think that we communicate well, and we're surprised when someone says that we didn't explain things in the way that our team or our staff or the listener could easily understand. Well, it's absolutely normal to fall short in this area from time to time. In this video, we'll review an example of effective communication, but I'll also give you tips and tricks on how to communicate for efficiency and in a way that you can adapt to your personal leadership style. So if you're interested in learning more, give this video a thumbs up and keep watching. At work, we often hear people complain about co-workers and leaders alike not being good communicators. When we take a look at what communication is, it's really all about, at its core, did person A share or express the thoughts, views, information in a way that is clearly understood by person B so that the message was conveyed in a way in which it was intended. Because communication takes on so many different forms, we each bring our own style and personality to the mix, and it's easy to get some things wrong. When we think of communication between people leaders and their direct reports, it's important to understand that your team is more likely to follow your leadership if your communication is clear, specific, and they have an understanding of what your expectations are. That's why it's essential as an emerging leader to look at the role of communication in leadership. For example, let's specifically talk about a way in which leaders can communicate effective time management and establish a protocol that the team can follow based on the leader's communication. So, example number 1. Let's say that you have a meeting with your team to discuss an upcoming project. So you meet with your team, and although you notice that no one's taking notes, there's a lot of positive feedback and valuable input, and you conclude the meeting sending everyone away and saying that you want to meet again in 2 weeks. So as time passes, about 3 weeks later, you become frustrated because you haven't seen a scheduled follow-up meeting date, even though you alluded to the fact in a previous meeting that that's what you wanted to see happen. You're also more than a little disturbed by the fact that there weren't any follow-up notes provided so that the team would know what actionable items they're responsible for. So let's walk through the scenario so that we can take note of the key communication factors, and let's review the possible examples of how the leader in this scenario could have communicated differently. So tip number 1. Tip number 1 is don't take anything for granted. The average leader might think that we're all working adults and working professionals should automatically know what is expected of them in the workplace. Well, I invite you to look at it from a different perspective. Perhaps your team has worked under various different leaders whose expectations were different from yours. That what's important to you is not important to them. You may say things like, they should already know. The thing is, they'll only know what you tell them. And you can't hold them accountable for their actions or inactions if you don't say what you expect. You should say something like, "Hello team, be sure to come to the meeting prepared to take lots of notes because I like for my meetings to be interactive and I don't want any of us to forget anything that we discussed." This will help your team to know how to prepare in advance and be more engaged and know how to follow up. This brings me to my next point. You should set clear, well-defined expectations at the outset. The truth is that your team will only be as prepared to meet your expectations based on how effectively and how efficiently you communicate. Now, don't misunderstand. In this video, I'm not talking about taking responsibility for their personal performance or individual accountability. It's clear that each individual contributor has a personal part to play when it comes to that. I'm specifically referring to how well you communicate your expectations in advance so that your team knows what's required based on your personal leadership style and so that they can be ahead of the curve. Most people take for granted that everyone should know what's expected of them, but that may not be true as a general rule of thumb, because each leader brings their own unique management or leadership style to the working group. By stating your expectations in advance, you let your team know what kind of leader you are, and you provide structure and a framework for moving forward. Here's an example of what that could look like. You could say something like, "Hello team, before we start the meeting, I would like for one of you to compile our key takeaways and provide a summary to the team so that we'll have it as a reference in our next meeting. I'd like you to take notes and send us all an email summary of what we discussed in today's meeting so that we can reference all of the follow-up and actionable items." By responding in this way, you were clear in assigning duties and you clearly detailed what you would like in the follow-up summary. You also set a clear time frame for a follow-up meeting date. Please feel free to share in the comments below if you have another option of what a possible response in this scenario could look like. So the key takeaway here is basically a no-brainer. Your team won't know your preferences unless you tell them. You want your communication to be clear and consistent with established follow-up protocols or actionable item steps. Now, for the question of the day, what things have you communicated to your team that seem to work well? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be interested in hearing from you. Now, if you're watching this video and you want to learn more about how to put out fires at work and reset priorities when others are alarmed, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so that you'll be the first to know when I post that video. As always, have a great week, be kind to yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.